All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to be looking at Matthew 18. This chapter has so much packed into it. Greatness, forgiveness, even some parables that are really going to make us think. And we're kicking things off with the disciples asking Jesus that age-old question, who's the greatest? But little did they know, they were about to get a lesson on what true greatness really looks like.
Yeah, it's funny how we humans always seem to get hung up on the same questions. Even back then,
That's
they were all vying for the top
Oh,
spots.
absolutely. Imagine you're a disciple, you're thinking you're about to get some epic leadership advice, and then Jesus calls over a child, like a kid, and says, unless you become like this little one, you won't even get into the kingdom of heaven. You're telling me true greatness isn't about, I don't know, climbing the corporate ladder or being an influencer. Jesus says it's about being like a child. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a total paradigm shift. You have to remember, back then, children were basically invisible in society. No power, no status, no say. So for Jesus to hold up a child as the
Right.
model for greatness, it flips everything on its head.
Okay, so that's definitely not what I would have expected. So how does this translate for us today? I mean, we might not be disciples, all jockeying for position, but I think we all get caught up in wanting to be seen as successful or important.
Absolutely. We are constantly bombarded with messages about achievement and status. But Matthew 18, it challenges us to redefine what greatness really means. What if it's not about outward success, but about cultivating inner qualities like humility, dependence on God, and that, simple childlike trust?
Man, I'm starting to see how radical this whole chapter really is. But things get kind of dark next, right? Jesus goes from talking about greatness to the seriousness of actually harming others, especially when it comes to their faith.
Yeah, Matthew 18:6 to 7 uses some pretty intense imagery. Jesus warns that it would be better to have a giant millstone tied around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to cause one of these little ones to stumble in their faith.
Whoa, okay. I'm trying to imagine having a millstone around my neck. That's not a good look.
Yeah.
But seriously, what's the message here? Is this really about self-harm, or is there a deeper meaning?
Of course, it's not about literal dismemberment. The millstone is a metaphor. It's meant to emphasize how grave this sin is. It's about taking radical action to avoid, causing spiritual harm, especially to those who are vulnerable or new to their faith.
Okay, so no actual millstones involved. Got it. But what are some, modern-day equivalents of causing harm to others, especially in their faith?
Well, think about it this way. Anything that could lead someone away from God or damage their relationship with Him is a serious offense. It could be spreading false teachings, being a hypocritical example, or even directly tempting someone into sin. These actions have consequences and they matter.
Yeah, that's a heavy responsibility.
Yeah.
Realizing how much our actions can impact others. It's like that ripple effect.
Yeah.
We might not even see the full extent of the harm we cause. But then Jesus goes on to tell this incredible story about a shepherd leaving 99 sheep to find just one lost one. Hold on, were sheep that important back then? Why would a shepherd risk losing 99 just to find one?
Well, sheep were more than just animals. They were a livelihood. Food, clothing, income, it all came from those flocks. So for a shepherd to leave the majority of his sheep to search for one lost one shows just how far God is willing to go. To find and restore even one lost soul, that's how valuable each person is to him.
Wow, it's amazing how that shepherd rejoices. When he finds that sheep, it's not just duty, it's pure joy. It makes you feel pretty seen and valued, knowing that you matter that much to God. But what happens when relationships within the church get broken? If someone wrongs you, what are you supposed to do?
Well, that's where things get really practical. Matthew 18 lays out some specific steps. For reconciliation, first, if someone in the church sins against you, you're supposed to go to them privately and try to work things out. If they listen, great, you've gained your brother or sister back.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if they don't listen? What if talking one-on-one doesn't resolve things?
Then Jesus advises, taking one or two others with you as witnesses. It's about escalating the situation thoughtfully, always with the goal of reconciliation.
Wait a minute, what does it mean to, bind and loose on earth? Is that some kind of, I don't know, spiritual power?
That's a good question. It refers to the authority given to believers to make decisions within the church that are in accordance with God's will. So when we bind something, we declare it forbidden or unacceptable. And when we loose something, we declare it permissible. The idea is that these decisions on earth reflect God's will in heaven.
So it's less about, magic powers, and more about making decisions as a community that are aligned with God's heart. It's like a checks and balances system
Yeah.
to make sure everyone's accountable. But what if even bringing witnesses doesn't work? What then?
Well, if all else fails, you bring it to the church as a whole. This process is designed to protect both the individual and the community. It starts with direct, private communication and only involves others. If reconciliation can't be achieved one-on-one,
Okay, so this is like a roadmap for resolving conflict. It's so practical. And then, just when you think things can't get more intense, Jesus drops this parable. That's both shocking and incredibly thought-provoking. The parable of the unforgiving servant.
right. Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive someone. Thinking he's being generous, he suggests up to 7 times. But Jesus blows his mind with the answer, 70 times 7. Basically, forgiveness should be limitless.
Wow, talk about setting the bar high. But then he tells this crazy story to illustrate his point. A king forgives a servant. An insane amount of money. I mean, we're talking millions, maybe even billions in today's currency.
Yeah, it was an astronomical sum, basically impossible to repay in a lifetime. And that same servant then turns around and refuses to forgive a fellow servant a tiny debt.
It's like being forgiven for robbing Fort Knox
Yeah.
and then refusing to forgive someone.
Yeah.
For borrowing $5, the servant's actions are just outrageous.
Exactly. The difference in the amounts is meant to be shocking. It makes us uncomfortable because it forces us to confront our own attitudes toward forgiveness. How often do WE hold on to grudges when we've been forgiven so much more?
It's like a mirror, right? Reflecting our own hypocrisy back at us. We're quick to ask for forgiveness, but slow to give it.
And that's precisely the point Jesus is making. If God can forgive us so much, all our mistakes, failures, and shortcomings, how can we possibly justify withholding forgiveness from others?
Man, I feel like we need to hit the pause button here. This is getting pretty heavy. There's so much to unpack.
Right.
Just these first few verses of Matthew 18.
Definitely. Why don't we give our listeners some time to absorb all this and come back for part 2?
Welcome back. I hope you had a minute to catch your breath. And we're diving right back into Matthew 18. We left off talking about that crazy parable of the unforgiving servant. And I gotta admit, it's really got me thinking
Yeah.
about my own attitude toward forgiveness.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. It really forces us to confront those moments when we're so quick to ask for forgiveness, but hesitant to give it to others.
Totally. It's like we forget how much we've been forgiven ourselves. But this isn't just about warm, fuzzy feelings or whatever. Jesus makes it pretty clear that there's a direct connection between forgiveness and our relationship with God.
Absolutely. In Matthew 18:35, he says, "So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." That's a pretty sobering thought.
Wow. So it's not about earning God's forgiveness by forgiving others, but it's more like a heart that has truly grasped God's grace. Can't help but overflow with forgiveness toward others.
Exactly. You've been given this incredible, undeserved gift of forgiveness. You naturally want to extend that same generosity to others. It becomes less about duty and more about a transformed heart.
Okay, yeah, that makes so much sense. It's like we're meant to be conduits of that grace, just letting it flow through us to others.
Which brings us back to that initial question about greatness, right? It's all connected. Humility, service, valuing each person, pursuing reconciliation, and offering that extravagant forgiveness. It all weaves together to create this picture of what it means to follow Jesus.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging picture,
Yeah.
but incredibly inspiring too. It raises the bar for sure,
Yeah.
showing us what it means to truly be a disciple.
It certainly does. And it invites us to continually examine our own lives and ask, am I living this out? Am I embodying the humility and forgiveness that Jesus modeled for us?
Right. It's like a lifelong journey, trying to align our hearts and actions with the God's heart of grace and mercy. But I think it's important to acknowledge that forgiveness, especially when you've been deeply hurt, is just plain hard.
You're absolutely right. It's not about minimizing the pain or pretending that the offense didn't happen. Forgiveness is a process, often a painful one, and it may take time.
So what encouragement can we find in this chapter for those who are really struggling to forgive? What did you say to someone who feels stuck in that bitterness and resentment?
Well, firstly, I'd say, you're not alone. This is a common human struggle, and you're not a failure for finding it difficult. And secondly, God understands your pain, he sees your hurt, and he's not asking you to simply sweep it under the rug.
So forgiveness isn't about denying the wrong that was done.
Exactly. It's about choosing to release the other person from the debt they owe you. It's about surrendering your right to punish or to seek revenge.
Man, that can be a long and difficult process. But it sounds like you're saying it's ultimately for our own freedom and healing.
Absolutely. Holding on to bitterness and anger only hurts us in the end. It's like drinking poison. and hoping the other person dies, it poisons our hearts and keeps us captive to the past. Forgiveness is about breaking free from that prison.
Okay, I get that. But how do you actually do it? It's easy to say, like, forgive, but actually letting go of that hurt can feel impossible sometimes. Any practical tips?
I wish there was a simple formula, but prayer is essential. Asking God to help you see the person who hurt you through his eyes, to soften your heart, and to give you the strength to let go. It's admitting that we can't do this on our own. We need God's grace and power to truly forgive.
So we're acknowledging our own limitations
Uh-huh.
and asking for supernatural help. That makes sense. But it's also important to remember that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the wrong or pretending it didn't happen, right?
Precisely. It's about releasing them from your judgment, but it doesn't negate the need for healthy boundaries to protect yourself.
Okay, yeah, that's such an important distinction. Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't always the same thing. You can forgive someone
Yeah.
without necessarily restoring the relationship, especially if it's not safe or healthy to do so.
Exactly. Reconciliation requires both parties to be willing to acknowledge the hurt, seek forgiveness, and work towards restoring the relationship. But even if reconciliation isn't possible, we can still choose to forgive.
Right. That makes me think about the Lord's Prayer and those words. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. It's like we're asking God to extend to us the same mercy and grace that we're willing to extend to others.
That's a profound insight. It shows how interconnected forgiveness is. It's not just a transaction between two people. It's a reflection of our relationship with God and the way he has forgiven us. And remember, it's an ongoing process, not a one-time event.
So even when we stumble and struggle to forgive, we can always come back to God, confess our own shortcomings, and ask for his help to soften our hearts.
Exactly. God's grace is always available. He's patient with us in our weaknesses and never gives up on us.
This is a lot to take in. Matthew 18 is really challenging me to think differently about forgiveness, both giving and receiving. It's not just a nice idea. It's like woven into the fabric of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
It is. And it's a journey, not a destination. We'll always be learning and growing in this area. But the good news is we have a God who is rich in mercy and eager to help us along the way.
Well, I don't know about you, but I need a moment to process all of this. Forgiveness, reconciliation, it's heavy stuff. What do you say we give our listener a break too and come back for part 3?
Sounds like a plan. Join us next time as we wrap up our deep dive into Matthew 18.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Matthew 18. Wow, we've covered a lot. Humility, forgiveness, that whole process of reconciliation. It's been intense.
It really has. But I think one of the key takeaways from this chapter is how it bridges that gap between the spiritual and the practical. We've gone from these big ideas about the kingdom of heaven to like really specific instructions on how to deal with conflict and broken relationships.
Yeah, totally. It's like Matthew 18 is a handbook for navigating life and community, especially when things get messy.
It really is. And one of the most powerful tools we're given in this chapter is prayer. We've touched on this before, but it's so important, especially when we're dealing with these heavy topics.
Yeah, right. In Matthew 18:19-20, Jesus talks about that power of agreement in prayer, saying, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. And then he follows it up with that beautiful promise, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them.
Man, those words are so comforting.
They really are, especially when we think about all the difficult stuff we've been wrestling with, forgiveness, reconciliation, dealing with offenses. It's a reminder that we're not in this alone.
We've got a God who not only hears our prayers, but promises to be present with us and even like empowers us to live out these challenging teachings.
It's like he's saying, I'm right here with you every step of the way. And it's not just about individual piety either. Jesus highlights the importance of gathering together. It's about community, about supporting and encouraging each other as we try to put these principles into practice. Oh, for sure. We need each other. We need that accountability and the strength that comes from praying together. It makes me think about how often we try to go it alone in our spiritual lives. But this chapter is like, nope, you need your people. You need that support system.
Exactly. And it's within that context of community, that gathering of believers, that we can practice forgiveness, seek reconciliation, and hold each other accountable to that high standard Jesus has set for us.
Right. It's almost like this beautiful, messy, challenging, but ultimately life-giving cycle. We mess up, we hurt each other, we need forgiveness, we offer forgiveness, we come together, we pray, we're transformed, and then, we do it all again.
That's a great way to put it. It's that rhythm of grace and redemption playing out in our own lives and in the life of the church as a whole.
I think that's the big takeaway from Matthew 18. It's not just a list of rules or some abstract principles, but it's an invitation to be part of this ongoing story of forgiveness, reconciliation, and that pursuit of true greatness.
Yeah, it's a call to action. We're challenged to actually live this out in our relationships, our families, our communities, and in the world around us. It's not just about feeling good, it's about doing good too.
And to me, one of the coolest things about this chapter is that it reminds us that the kingdom of heaven isn't some far-off place. It's breaking into the here and now. Every time we choose humility, offer forgiveness, and genuinely seek the well-being of others, it's like we get to participate in making that kingdom a reality right here on earth.
That's a beautiful thought. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Matthew 18, I'd love to leave you with this question. What's one small step you can take today to put these principles into practice?
Maybe it's reaching out to someone you've hurt, or offering forgiveness to someone who's hurt you. Maybe it's taking a quiet moment to reflect on your own heart and ask God to help you. Become more like that humble child Jesus spoke of. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. Even small acts of obedience can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the power of those small steps. God can use them to bring about incredible transformation, not just in your own life, but in the lives of those around you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you've been challenged, encouraged, and maybe even a little bit changed by what we've discovered together.
And we encourage you to go back and reread Matthew 18 for yourself. Let these words sink in and see what fresh insights you uncover. It's one of those chapters that just keeps giving, no matter how many times you read it. Until next time, keep diving deep.